All right, it's 6:30, so I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. This is Cows Goes Green. It's our Earth Month celebration. My name is Mark Christ. I'm head of adult programming for the Central Arkansas Library System. And we've had a month-long series of Monday evening talks about various ways to keep the planet healthy. And I don't want to say we saved the best for last, but tonight's a definite treat. We have Lynn Foster is going to be our guest speaker, and she's going to be speaking about Arkansas wild places or spaces. Lynn, like me, is a transplanted Yankee. She's been here for 35 years. She's a retired law professor, and not being a law professor anymore, she gets to devote her time to doing really cool things like what she's going to tell us about tonight. I have a few housekeeping things. This program is going to be recorded. We will be able to take questions in the Q&A or in the chat box. So if you have any questions, put them in there. I'll keep an eye on them, and we'll just go ahead and get started. Lynn, take it away.
Thank you so much, Mark. I'm going to go ahead and show a PowerPoint here. Is that working? Okay, great. Okay, so first of all, thank you, Mark, and thank you, Cals, for inviting us to present tonight. I'd also like to thank Janet Lanza, who's the co-coordinator of Arkansas Wild Spaces with me, Karen Seal, who's the founder of the first Wild Ones chapter in Arkansas several years ago, and also the Central Arkansas Master Naturalists for receiving Janet's and my proposal for Arkansas Wild Spaces with such enthusiasm and generosity. So tonight, what I'm going to be talking about is the work of scientist Douglas Ptolemy, his theories, and Arkansas Wild Spaces, which is a brand new program. We're just getting off the ground, and it's based on his work. So I'm going to start with the bad parts, the crisis parts, which you all are aware of, I know. And that is that right now, only about 5% of the United States is in anything close to a pristine ecological state. And this is because the rest of our country has either been cut down or tilled or drained or grazed, or otherwise developed. And this map shows the percentage of land use in the United States today. And you can see what a tiny amount of land consists of undeveloped land and undeveloped in a natural way. So as a result, many insect populations now are dropping. This has all been in the news in the last 5 years or so. Last year, Audubon noted that 3 billion birds in North America have disappeared in the last 50 years. And as a result of this habitat destruction and environmental degradation caused by human population growth and increasing consumption, we are now in the middle of what science is calling the 6th great extinction, also known as the Anthropocene extinction, meaning caused by man. We're up to almost 8 billion people, and we're using up our resources in a very unsustainable manner. So, nature is in trouble. Nature needs our help. What can you do? Is there any hope? And Doug Ptolemy and Arkansas Wild Spaces think that there is. And part of this hope rests with us in what we do in our own yards, our backyards, our front yards. So what is the function of this yard. Here's a typical American yard. And if we think about it, traditionally, the yard was a place to be attractive. And we used aesthetic criteria in thinking about the functions of our yard. Most homeowners want their yards to be attractive. And of course, this is a very personal and subjective thing. So it can range from a garden full of flowering plants to a simple square of frequently mowed lawn, or maybe a savanna type setting with trees and grass underneath. Some people want their lawn to serve a functional purpose of being a place for children to easily play games. But today in the United States, you can't help but notice how much big business has invested in the idea that being a good neighbor is owning a riding lawnmower that runs off fossil fuels, spreading poisonous chemicals on our lawns in the form of herbicides, pesticides, and fertilizer, and going to the garden center to buy non-native plants. And as a result of this way of living, suburban development destroys about 1 million acres of wildlife habitat each year. Lawns waste resources. They use 9 billion gallons of water nationwide per day, according to the Environmental Protection Agency. According to another government agency, homeowners use more herbicides and pesticides on their lawns than the agriculture industry uses on crops. Our night lighting hurts insects, birds, and mammals, and our fencing prevents the movement of wildlife. So this is Doug Ptolemy. This was a picture taken for Smithsonian Magazine, and he has made many presentations around the United States in the past couple of years. They can be found on YouTube. And if you're interested in this at all and haven't seen any of them, I highly encourage you to watch some. He is a tremendous presenter. And as the first slide noted, some of these slides are his that he has been very willing to share with me. I had the good fortune to see him in March of last year in St. Louis, where I actually got the idea for Arkansas Wild Spaces. But he has been around, he's been writing for the general public for more than 10 years. He's a professor of entomology and wildlife ecology at the University of Delaware, and he has written Bringing Nature Home, that was his first book in 2009. Nature's Best Hope, which came out last year and was a New York Times bestseller. The Nature of Oaks, which is coming out next month. And also with Rick Dark, he co-authored The Living Landscape in 2014. So he has written a series of books. They're all easy to get a hold of. And these are basically his theories, which he and now others have proved and have demonstrated are good science. So what are his ideas in brief that are relevant to Arkansas Wild Spaces tonight? Plants are the base of food chains in nearly all ecosystems. And by ecosystem, we mean a biological community of interacting organisms and their physical environment. An ecosystem has to have a sufficient number of plants to support animals. But plants aren't the only necessary part of a food chain. Insects are also necessary. In fact, they're so necessary that E.O. Wilson, who is a scientist who has written a lot about insects, he calls them the little things that run the world. And now we're coming up on point number 4 here, which is probably the most important one of these points, and one that I was totally unaware of until about 3 years ago when I started reading Ptolemy's writing. And that is that non-native plants can't serve as hosts for insects. So in other words, if you have a non-native plant in an ecosystem, that plant typically is contributing nothing to the ecosystem. And this is not something we've known for a very long time. This is kind of fairly recent scientific knowledge, but we know it now. And so a yard full of non-native plants is going to be death to an ecosystem. But the exciting part is that with this knowledge, we can remove non-native plants, especially invasive plants, which aggressively take out native plants. We can restore the natives, and thereby we can restore the ecosystems. We don't have to remove all natives. We need to remove all non-native invasives, but we don't have to remove all non-natives, as you'll see a couple of slides down. So what should a yard be, according to Ptolemy? A yard should be the site of a diverse and balanced food web that's essential to a sustainable ecosystem. And as landowners, we have a responsibility to maintain sustainable ecosystems. So, what you might be thinking right now is, but my yard is so small. Well, Ptolemy has done the math, and he says that if we add up what's in all the yards and a few other places like rights of way, golf courses, and airports, that comes up to 600 million acres. And even just half of that is still extremely significant, 300 million acres. How much area is 600 million acres? Well, it's the size of these states combined. In fact, it's bigger than all of these states combined. So which is your yard, and what do you want your yard to be? Is your yard a deadscape, like the yard on the left, or is it a livescape? And is it going to help support an ecosystem? So how do we restore natural habitat? It consists of both food and also places to live. So first, we want native plants. Because in general, we know that insects are not going to eat non-natives. Second, we want to be sure that we include what we call keystone plants. And these Ptolemy defines as the 5% of plants that are food for 73% of Lepidoptera. What are Lepidoptera? They are moths, butterflies, and skippers. And the best way to think about Lepidoptera is that they are insects that go through a caterpillar stage, because that's what we want. We want the caterpillars. Keystone plants give us the most bang for our bucks. We have to have other things in addition to keystones, but we've got to have the keystone plants. Next, we want to attract and grow Lepidoptera because the caterpillars are food for so many other animals. The other plants that we want are specialist plants. And we want these in addition to the keystone plants because most caterpillars are host plant specialists. Caterpillars are not like us. We can go to a grocery store and we can eat any one of the things in that grocery store and be happy. Caterpillars in general are attuned to the chemistry typically of only a few genera of plants, because plants have over millennia tried to defend themselves against insects, and they try to repel the insects that eat them and the animals that eat them. And caterpillars in response have evolved defenses to what the plants are defending themselves with. And so I'll talk about this just a little bit more in a couple of slides. But in addition to keystone plants, we want to include specialists as well. And then there are some other essential aspects of building habitat. In addition to the food, we also want to provide leaf litter because most caterpillars are going to spend their pupa stage either in leaf litter or else in the ground. We don't want to leave lights on at night because these interfere with nocturnal animals. They can interfere to the extent that the animals won't even reproduce. We want to make sure that we provide berries for the birds who live here in the wintertime and the birds that migrate through. And finally, for native bees, who many of whom are threatened, we want to provide bee habitat. Most bees actually live in the ground. So we want to provide some bare ground, hollow stems, brush piles, and snags. All of these are habitat for native bees. So let's kind of go back through this list and talk about how you can do more research and find out more information about the elements in the building blocks of restoring natural habitat in a yard. So first of all, what do we mean when we say a native species? And the example that Ptolemy likes to give here is is a ginkgo a native species because it lived in North America, 6 million years ago when the dinosaurs lived here. Sorry, that time period is wrong, but you get the idea. And Ptolemy says no, even though ginkgos lived here 1 million years ago, they have not co-evolved with other species that live in our ecosystems today. So a native species is a species that has co-evolved with other species in an ecosystem. So if I have a genus and a species name, like Quercus alba, the Latin name for white oak, how can I tell if that's a native? And probably the easiest way is to use BONAP. So BONAP stands for Biota of North America Program. And so I go to my computer and I would Google BONAP Quercus, and that is BONAP and the genus name for white oak. That first name is genus, and alba, the second name, is the species name. So if I Google BONAP Quercus, I'm going to see a separate map for every single Quercus species that has been recorded in the United States. And rather than show you that screen, I'm just going to go ahead and show you the screen for Quercus alba, because that's the species that I'm interested in. And when you're using BONAP, green means that it's native. So you can see from this map that Quercus alba, the white oak, is native to all of Arkansas. So I could plant a Quercus alba anywhere in Arkansas. And in fact, Arkansas is already full of them. And my yard is already full of Quercus alba as well. Here's another example. What plant is this? Lagerstromia indica is crepe myrtle. So is crepe myrtle native to Arkansas? Green means native, blue, not native. So we can tell that crepe myrtle is not native to Central Arkansas or anywhere in the United States. It's an introduced species. It's a non-native. So if I'm looking for natives, I don't want to buy a crepe myrtle because that is a non-native. And BONAP will tell me that. So BONAP is a handy tool. If you haven't ever used it, I recommend you try it. And again, just Google BONAP and the genus name, and that will take you to a page of maps. Once you run that Google search, BONAP should come up the first thing, and it's the BONAP Atlas that you're looking for. So now we know how to find out whether something is native. We know what a native is and how we can find out whether something is native to Central Arkansas. What about a keystone genus or species? What is a keystone genus and how do we tell whether a specific genus is a keystone or not? Ptolemy defines keystone genera as the 5% of plant genera that host 70 to 75% of Lepidoptera species. And his studies and other studies have shown that a landscape without keystone genera is going to support far, far fewer caterpillar species, even if the plants in the landscape are all native. And so again, this goes to the importance of the keystone idea. How much of a yard should be keystone species? Ptolemy doesn't really have a number for that, but what he does say is that the ideal landscape has a backbone of keystone plants plus a diversity of other natives. And again, why diversity? Because most caterpillars are host plant specialists. And I'll give you an example of a very iconic specialist here in a minute or two. So now that we know what a keystone genus is, how can we find out which genera are keystones here in central Arkansas? You can go to this URL, and the way to get there is to Google National Wildlife Foundation Native Plant Finder, and that will take you straight to the page. And it works by zip code. So if I type in 72204 and I ask it for trees and shrubs, it is going to give me trees and shrubs that are native to zip code 72204 in rank order. And it's going to start with the genus or the genera of trees and shrubs that are hosts to the most caterpillar species. So I know that this is small print and I apologize, but let's just take a look and go through here. You can see that this top genus is that of the oak, Quercus. And oaks support or host over 400 species of caterpillar. So the oak is our top keystone genus here in central Arkansas. And in fact, that's the case in most of the United States. Now out on the East Coast in the Northeast, typically oaks will support over 500 species of Lepidoptera. Here it's over 400 species. And this is followed, the oak tree is followed by cherries, prunus, cherries and plums, birches, hickories, willows, crabapple, maple, and poplars. And that gives us the top 8 genera for trees and shrubs. In general, trees not only have the most biomass, but they are going to be the biggest keystone genera. And they typically are going to support hundreds of more caterpillar species than flowering plants or grasses. Let's just take a look at the top 8 genera for flowering grasses. And this is a different zip code, 72205. In general, pretty much no matter what zip code you put in, if you're in central Arkansas, you're going to get the same results. Of course, if you put in a zip code for Florida or for New York, you're going to get some different results as far as your top genera go. So for flowers and grasses, we can see that goldenrod is the top flower. It supports 85, it hosts 85 species of caterpillars, followed by sunflower, amorpha, which is false indigo, indigo bush, lead plant, eupatorium, which is Joe Pye weed, hibiscus, which is also rose mallow, panicum, which is a grass, lotus, which is trefoil, which my yard is totally full of, and violets. And those are the top 8. But again, note the difference because our top tree supported over 420 caterpillar species, and our top flower, the goldenrod, only supports 85. So those are the keystones, what they are, and how to find them for your zip code. What about specialist plants? Here are just a couple of examples. The milkweed is, you may know, food for monarch butterfly caterpillars. And even though monarch butterflies will drink the nectar of many different flower species, the caterpillars can only eat one plant, and that is the milkweed plant. If there is no milkweed, there are no monarchs. And the monarch is decreasing rapidly. Their winter counts, they winter in Mexico, the monarch butterflies from this part of the United States. And the 2021 winter monarch butterfly count was down 26% from the year before. The United States is considering making them a threatened, an endangered species. They haven't done that yet. I think there's being a lot of pressure put on them to do it. Hopefully they will do it soon. But monarchs have lost an estimated 165 million acres of breeding habitat, and that's the biggest reason for why they're disappearing. Dicamba, which the Arkansas State Plant Board has permitted to be sprayed for several years on soybean fields, kills milkweed, which is the food of the monarch caterpillar. So imagine how much help it would be to monarchs if we all planted some milkweed in our yards. The very first year that I planted milkweeds 2 years ago, monarchs laid eggs on them and I had caterpillars and I was so excited. It's a big high point in my life that year. So this is a picture from my yard. That is a monarch caterpillar there on that leaf, that milkweed leaf. So just remember, this is the classic specialist. It lives on only one plant. If we don't have that plant, we're not going to have that species. And the same can be said of other insects as well. For example, the giant swallowtail butterfly is native to Arkansas, and it must lay its eggs on wafer ash, prickly ash, or Hercules club trees here in this state. If it has none of those trees as host trees, then it's not going to be able to lay its eggs and it won't be reproducing. Now, as we go through this line of connection, environmental connections between plants and insects and the animals that eat the insects, one thing that a lot of people do not know is that even the birds that come to your feeder and eat the seeds out of your feeder, they have to feed their young on caterpillars. By and large, they do not feed their young with seeds. 96% of terrestrial birds rear their young on insects. And caterpillars dominate that insect diet in 16 out of 20 bird families. And the bird families that were studied in that research were common yard birds. So when you are looking at the birds in your yards, the birds at your feeder, even though those adult birds are gobbling up the seeds, if they don't have insects, if they don't have caterpillars most of the time to feed their babies, they're not going to be able to raise a brood. So in case you're wondering, I know you are, how many caterpillars does it take to raise a nest of chickadees? And chickadees are tiny little birds. They're very small. Well, to rear one brood, the parent chickadees, because both parents go out and get the caterpillars to feed their young, one brood of chickadees, the parents must feed their young between 6,200 and 9,100 caterpillars. So that's how many it takes, thousands of caterpillars to raise one brood of just a few little baby chickadees. So Keystone species, very important. What % of a yard should be native so as to sustain a native ecosystem? And the answer to that is 70%. So if you love your crepe myrtles, you can keep your crepe myrtles. They just should not be more than 30% of the biomass, and the biomass is the green stuff. So it's the leaves on the trees, the leaves on the flowers, the grass on the ground. Keep your non-natives to 30% or fewer, and natives need to be at least 70%. And here on this slide are just pictures of the top 2 Keystone genera. We've got white oak here on the left, and some goldenrod on the right. And I apologize for my dogs barking if you can hear them in the background. So another question is, what % of caterpillars pupate in the soil or leaf litter? And again, this is something that people just don't think about. I never thought about it myself, that's for sure. I just assumed that those cocoons or chrysalises were on trees or flowering plants. Well, they're not. 94% of caterpillars pupate in the soil or in the leaf litter. So what do y'all do with your leaf litter? A lot of people get rid of it. That's where your Luna moth spends the winter. So if you have no leaf litter, you're not going to see a Luna moth. That's where fireflies spend the winter. So keep your leaf litter, keep as much as you can. You can use it as mulch in your gardens. You can keep a thin layer of it under the ground. You can keep it under the tree where the grass isn't going to grow very well anyway. But keep that leaf litter as much as you can, because there is so much life in it. And that is life that we are just snuffing out if we are disposing of that leaf litter. So if you go out and you start looking for native plants, I was out at a garden center, I'm not going to say which one, over the weekend, and you're going to run into native plants with a third name. And what's the deal with that third name? So here's an example that you might see. Asclepias tuberosa is butterfly weed, which is a species of milkweed. It's the kind with the bright orange flowers that's so pretty. But if you go to a garden center, you might see Asclepias tuberosa Cinderella. What's the Cinderella? That third name indicates that this plant that you're going to buy or thinking of buying is a cultivar. Okay. Now, milkweed is a native. So we would say this is a native cultivar, or another term that's used sometimes is nativar. What is a cultivar? It's a variety that's usually propagated not from seed, but instead clonally. So it might be a cutting from the plant. And there are a number of concerns about using cultivars instead of what I call straight native plants. One of the concerns is the genetic diversity that you need to have a healthy ecosystem. If you're buying multiple cultivars of the same species and they reproduce by being pollinated with each other, you're not getting genetic diversity. So if you are buying native plants, try first to look for those straight natives. Also avoid plants with neonicotinoid, which is a poison which kills bees. And supposedly the suppliers now are not selling plants with that poison in them. But just to be on the safe side, ask when you're buying your plants if they've been sprayed or if they're totally free from poison. So that is kind of the just a most basic and simple introduction to the science here, and also how to find out more information if you want to research this information on your own. And the internet is an incredible source for all sorts of information about native plants, how to plant them, how to grow them, how to propagate them. You can find all of that information on the internet. But we have now started a program called Arkansas Wild Spaces. And you can contact us at this email address, which is easy to remember, arkansaswildspaces@gmail.com. And this is the beta version of our logo. It's not final yet, but it's pretty far along, as you can see. And this is a brand new program of the Central Arkansas Master Naturalists. It will be starting up this summer, probably in June. And It will have a nominal cost, but in return for the cost that you pay, the price that you pay, you will get 2 yard visits from Arkansas Wild Spaces Habitat Advisors. We will come to your yard. We will talk to you about your plans for your yard, your goals for your yard, what you want your yard to achieve. Do you want a pollinator garden? Do you want a rain garden? Do you want hummingbirds? Do you want bird habitat? Do you want native bee habitat? We'll walk through your yard with you, and we will give you materials on planting and buying natives, creating habitat for bees and all sorts of other types of animals, the different types of gardens. We will tell you which invasive non-natives, if any, are in your yard, and we will also recommend natives for you to plant. We do have a certification process, and if you're interested, you can apply for certification. There are 3 levels to it: silver, gold, and platinum. And we're working on getting an internet presence. We don't know at this point whether it's going to be a website or Facebook page, but all this information will be posted and will be available for people to see when they sign up. And so if you certify, you can purchase a yard sign with that image on it, or whatever the image turns out to be. And so, having said all this and ended up a little bit earlier than I thought I would, I'd like to go ahead and open up the floor to questions. So I am going to stop sharing. And, oh, good, we've got 15 questions in the chat, so that's great. So let's take a look at the chat. Will you have access to the slides later? Well, this is being recorded, so you'll have access that way, and I'm happy to send a PDF of this to you, Mark, if you want to publish that somewhere.
Okay. Yeah, and this entire, this recording will end up on Cal's YouTube channel, so you'll be able to access the entire program there.
Yes. Okay, where do we find native species to plant in our yard? Eva, I know you. How are you? That is a great question. And the answer is, it's not as easy as we would like, but it's getting better. If you have a car and you can travel, the best place to go in Central Arkansas is Pine Ridge Gardens, and that's up near Russellville. A woman named Mary Ann King runs it, and she has an incredible selection of straight natives, very, very few cultivars. She has a few, but not many. She gets seeds from Arkansans, and she grows all sorts of incredible stuff. You can look for her catalog on the internet. It's Pine Ridge Gardens, and she lists plants that she has in stock, and also some others that she has in stock from time to time. She tells you about the plant. She tells you if it's an Arkansas native. She tells you whether it's monoecious or dioecious. So will one plant be enough, or do you need 2 for the plant to reproduce? And it's a source of incredible information. There are also a few native sellers here in Little Rock. The one that comes to mind is Grand Designs. Rand Retzloff runs that with his wife, whose name I don't know. The Audubon, Arkansas folks have a natural plant sale twice a year, and they sell mostly non-cultivar native plants. They have an incredible selection. They just had their plant sale. They'll be having another one in the fall. The Central Arkansas Master Naturalists have a greenhouse out at Pinnacle Mountain State Park, and we have native plant sales twice a year. Very, very few varieties, but our prices are incredibly low. So that's a great source to get native plants as well. And then there are some some non-local folks. There are native plant sellers up in Northwest Arkansas. There's quite a few. There's Prairie Moon. That is a place, I think it's in Wisconsin, with a lot of information about natives on its website. And you would really be surprised to find out how many of our natives are natives up there as well. But it's best to start out locally. And if you can't find what you want locally, then work outward. And the reason for that is genetic. Because even if you are talking about the same genus and species, there are going to be local ecotypes. And so if you can get the plant locally, that will be best. Let's see. Restate the website for the top 8 genera. The website is the National Wildlife Foundation Native Plant Finder. And if you Google that, you should go straight to it. Question from Patty Bell. Hi, Patty Bell. If you move the leaf litter, Patty Bell went up to St. Louis with me to hear Doug Ptolemy. And I was just so grateful for her company. We had the best trip ever, even though it was the first weekend of COVID. And we worried that we might have been exposed to COVID all the way back down to Arkansas, but we weren't. So if you move the leaf litter, does it have the same effect as getting rid of it? No, you can move the leaf litter. You can rake it over onto your garden and use it as mulch. You know, if you move it out of your yard, you know, into a black plastic bag and leave it on the street to be picked up, that has the same effect as getting rid of it. But just moving it from place to place in your yard does not. Where is the best place to get the native plants? I think I answered that question. What is the cost? How can I sign up now? We haven't finalized the cost yet. And you can send an email to that email address that I gave you, arkansaswildspaces@gmail.com. And you can tell us in your email that you want to sign up, and we will sign you up. We have a waiting list. It's not very long, and we will put you on the waiting list. Hey, Susan, how are you? Good to hear from you. Glad that you're interested in this. Let's see. I think that's everything. We've gone through all of it. Oh, okay, here's one more question from Patty Bell. Who do you recommend to speak to homeowners associations about this? I'd be happy to speak to a homeowners association. That is one thing on our to-do list, to start getting in touch with homeowners associations. If you live in a subdivision that has what are called restrictive covenants, and if you have them, you know that you have them. They typically regulate what you can put in your yard. Not usually the backyard, but definitely the front yard. And the thing about the restrictive covenants is that it's just going to depend on what your covenants say exactly. And that varies from subdivision to subdivision. So if I lived in a subdivision that had restrictive covenants, I would want to look at them, and before I bought any natives, see what they said. And then if I thought I might run into problems, talk to the homeowners association board, see if there's any chance to change the restrictive covenants. If you look at Doug Ptolemy's later YouTube presentations, like presentations from this year or last year, he talks in general terms about homeowners associations and how you can plant your natives so that they look more formal, so that they look more orderly and more neat. He does have some information on this, but it's possible. One picture that he shows is a picture of a formal garden of natives. And it looks just like a formal garden that you would see anywhere, but there are only natives in this formal garden. So So if you're running into problems with a homeowners association, let me know and I'd be happy to come and talk to them. And also one of our new habitat advisors is an ex-developer. He's a retired developer and he's a lot of experience with homeowners associations. So haven't talked to him about this specific topic yet, but he might be willing to come and speak as well and would have a really unique point of view as a speaker since he used to be a developer. Another question, how long do you have to leave the leaf litter on the ground to reap all the benefits? Until the weather warms up in the spring. I am thinking about starting to, I have way too much to compost. I'm thinking about starting to do a little bit of selective burning with mine. And once the temperature is consistently warm, and I would say out of the 40s at night, I think you're good to go at that point. So you don't have to let it sit on the ground forever, but you should wait until things warm up and are consistently warm in the spring. So great question. So I get excited and I tend to talk faster than I normally would. So Mark, do you have any questions?
Well, not a question. I'll just make the observation that I've been composting way too early. I'll know how to do much better this coming year. I was curious though, are there any particular invasive non-natives that we should have, have our eyes out for?
That's a great question too. We're in the process of constructing a list of those, but I'll start with what's in my yard, and that would be Chinese privet, which grows everywhere like crazy and is extremely invasive. Bamboo. I just shake my head whenever I see that somebody has planted bamboo in their yard because it's really hard to get rid of. Patty Bell says honeysuckle, and that is true. Japanese honeysuckle is the invasive. But I would say go out and look for the native honeysuckle. There is Lonicera sempervirens is the name, and there's one form of it that is red and orange, and it's the most beautiful flower you've ever seen, and hummingbirds love it. And there's another form that's yellow. So don't rip up your honeysuckle unless you're sure that it is the invasive kind, but most of it is the invasive kind. Horsetail reed, I apologize. I don't know anything about horsetail reed, but if you just run a Google search and type in horsetail reed native Arkansas, and that should get you some information. You're welcome. Sorry, I didn't know the answer to that. Another invasive, English ivy. I shake my head whenever I see somebody planting English ivy. I have a bunch of it in my yard, and it's taken me a couple of years, but I've almost got all of it ripped out. Another invasive is Nandina. And there was one research study shown, there was a research study done a couple of years ago that came back with the finding that the Nandina berries are poisonous to birds. So even if you love your Nandina, at least cut the berries off and keep them away from birds. And I would just say, get rid of the Nandina plants and plant something in their place. Plant some chokeberry or plant some winterberry or wax myrtle, berries that the birds can eat in the winter that aren't going to hurt them. It's been shown that the berries of native plants are better for birds than the berries of Chinese privet because they have more fat and less sugar content than Chinese privet. So, one thing I'm working on in my yard is planting berries for birds, because right now, basically all that I have for the birds is privet, and that's just not very good. So
I think I'm going to have to do a complete scorched earth campaign on my entire yard after this.
contact Arkansas Wild Spaces.
I will.
We will come out and visit your yard and commiserate with you and tell you what you need to do.
Sounds good.
All right.
Do we have any other questions?
Thanks everybody for your interest. There is a huge amount of interest in this now, and that is great. That is a wonderful thing. You know, this is kind of new science. People just haven't known about it. And now that we're discovering, you know, how this all works and you know, the fact that we're wrecking parts of it, but now we know how to put it back together again. So it's really powerful stuff. You know, I just got interested in working on my yard in the last 3 years. And today I was outside and I saw lots of hummingbirds feeding off my red buckeye and my eastern columbine. And I have more bees than I've had in the past. I know that. And it just gives you a great feeling to be out in nature and also to know that you're helping nature.
Thank you, Lynn. This was I'm going to anger previous programs, but we did save the best for last. This does conclude the Monday evening programs for the Cows Goes Green Earth Month celebration, but there are still a number of programs that we'll be having for children and for families through the end of the week. You can go to cows.org and go to the events page, and you'll find a complete list of those. And thank everyone for attending. And Lynn, thank you again for an incredible program.
Well, thank you, Cals, for the invitation.
We'll have you back.
All right. Thanks. Can't wait.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.